Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into one of the most widely read books in literal history, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's The Little Prince. Now, if you're like most of us, you probably just remember this as a charming, kind of whimsical children's fairy tale about a boy hopping around the cosmos. But we're going to peel back the layers on this one. By digging into the historical record, we're going to see how this beloved story is actually built on some incredibly profound real-world inspirations, deep personal tragedies, and honestly, some very mature themes. To guide us today, I want you to keep a few key questions in the back of your mind. First up, what biographical trauma actually inspired the prince? Because as you'll see, the author was pulling heavily, absolutely heavily, from his own deeply personal and sometimes devastating life experiences. Second, we need to ask, how does World War II frame this entire story? The backdrop of a world totally consumed by war and a writer living in incredibly stressful exile, well, it drastically shaped the narrative tone and the hidden warnings tucked inside the book's pages. And lastly, what are the sociocultural critiques hiding out on those different planets? The adults the prince bumps into on his journey. They aren't just quirky characters for the sake of it. They're actually direct reflections and pretty sharp critiques of modern society's biggest flaws. Okay, so here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to systematically break down this novella by looking through three specific lenses: biographical, historical, and sociocultural, before wrapping it all up. We're looking way beyond the surface of a simple bedtime story here. Let's kick things off with the biographical lens. It's time to see how the author's wild dual life as a pioneering aviator and a grieving brother basically wrote the plot. You literally cannot separate the plot of The Little Prince from the author's real life. Born into an aristocratic family in 1900, Saint-Exupéry dealt with massive heartbreak early on when his younger brother François died of rheumatic fever. He was only 15. Saint-Exupéry later joined the French military, became completely obsessed with aviation, and then comes 1935. While trying to break an airspeed record, he and his navigator actually crashed their plane smack in the middle of the Sahara Desert. They survived the crash itself, but they faced rapid, near-fatal dehydration over 4 agonizing days. I'm talking vivid hallucinations before they were finally rescued by a desert tribesman. Now think about the setup of The Little Prince. The narrator is a pilot stranded in the Sahara, dehydrating, trying to fix his plane when he meets the prince. The story literally mirrors the author's own terrifying fight for survival. And the parallels get even more heartbreaking. Listen to the actual final words of his 15-year-old brother, François, spoken right from his deathbed. He said, "Don't worry, I'm all right. I can't help it. It's my body." No, take a second and compare that to the little prince reassuring the pilot right before he lets the snake bite him so he can go back to his asteroid. The prince says his body is too heavy to take with him and that it's only an empty shell. The little prince leaving Earth isn't just a plot point. It's this incredibly poignant, almost literal homage to the tragic loss of his little brother. Let's shift gears to our second lens, the historical context, and look at how the dark shadow of World War II completely impacted his creative process. So the crucial thing to understand here is just how stressful his exile actually was. After France collapsed in 1940, Saint-Exupéry fled to the US. He was an expatriate desperately trying to convince America to enter the war. In the summer and fall of 1942, he rented this place called the Bevan House on Long Island. And it was there, fueled by late-night shifts, scrambled eggs, and just immense anxiety about his home country, that he actually wrote and painted the watercolors for The Little Prince. And get this. When the book was published in the US in 1943, it was actually banned in his native France by the collaborating Vichy regime. They saw him as a threat. The trauma of that massive global conflict seeped straight into this so-called children's tale. Take the giant baobab trees. In the story, the prince has to constantly weed his tiny planet to stop these grasping roots from tearing his world apart. Based on the historical record and the author's own anti-fascist resistance work, researchers widely agree this is a really dark allegory. The baobabs represent the unchecked existential threat of Nazi fascism. It's this idea of an evil that, if you don't uproot it early, will literally destroy the globe. You can really feel the weight of the war in an epilogue the author originally drafted but eventually cut. He wrote, "On one star, someone has lost a friend. On another, someone is ill. On another, someone is at war." He left it out to keep the story more ambiguous, but man, it shows exactly where his head was at. Despite being 43 and dealing with severe injuries from all his past crashes, Saint-Exupéry was just desperate to fight for his homeland. He pulled every string he could to rejoin a reconnaissance squadron. And then, tragically, in July of 1944, just weeks before the liberation of Paris, he vanished over the Mediterranean on a spy mission. He never even got to see his book published in a liberated France. Moving on to our third lens, let's explore how the author uses his planetary characters to critique the sort of spiritual decay he saw in the adult world. Just look at the stark contrast between two of the most memorable characters the prince meets. First, the businessman. He just blindly counts stars so he can write the number down, lock it in a drawer, and claim he owns them. It's a massive indictment of materialism, capitalist greed, and this weird adult obsession with quantifiable wealth. But then, on the flip side, we have the lamplighter. He's forced to just endlessly put out and relight a lamp every single minute because his planet is spinning faster and faster, but his orders never change. This one is a super pointed critique of mechanized industrial labor and the modern worker's total lack of autonomy. Just listen to how the little prince describes that businessman. It perfectly nails the author's frustration. He says, he has never smelled a flower, he has never looked at a star, he has never loved anyone. The businessman organizes his whole existence around something completely futile, completely ignoring the stuff that actually gives life meaning. It's such a powerful reminder of how adults can just lose touch with childlike wonder, prioritizing spreadsheets and ownership over human connection, nature, and love. And if we look a little closer at the lamplighter, the setup perfectly maps onto the modern laborer. His working conditions get worse as his environment speeds up, kind of like a high-tech, rapidly advancing industrial society. Yet he has absolutely no say over his own schedule. His time to rest just evaporates. It's a critique of hustle culture that honestly feels a little too relevant today, right? What's really interesting, though, is that the prince actually respects the lamplighter way more than the others. Why? Because the guy is at least devoted to a duty outside of his own selfish ego, even if the duty itself has become completely absurd. It's a masterclass in existential absurdism, casually dropped right into the middle of a fairy tale. Okay, let's pull all these threads together for our final contextual summary and see what we've unpacked. Through the biographical lens, we saw how a terrifying near-death plane crash in the Sahara, along with the tragic final words of his 15-year-old brother, literally formed the skeleton of this plot. Through the historical lens, we understand this is a wartime manuscript. It was penned in a lonely New York exile by an anti-fascist pilot, hiding warnings about Nazism inside little watercolor drawings of baobab trees. And finally, through the sociocultural lens, it becomes clear that those whimsical characters on tiny planets, they're actually razor-sharp critiques of a modern world obsessed with greed and trapped in mindless labor. So, I'm going to leave you with this one thought to chew on. Knowing all of this profound real-world context, how does it change your memory of The Little Prince? Because once you see the trauma, the war, and the heavy societal critiques that Antoine de Saint-Exupéry wove into these pages, there is just no way you can look at the simple story of a boy and his rose the same way ever again. It is a brilliant, urgent message about what actually matters in life. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep looking beyond the surface.